Tenure as the Senate Majority Leader, and Chuck Schumer and his team are attempting to break the rules in order to break the budget. Jake Sherman and PunchbowlNews.com have the scoop. Good morning, Jake. How are you?
I'm good, Hugh. How are you?
Good. I wish everyone subscribed to PunchbowlNews.com for your morning newsletter, which I believe is free. They would know about this, but they don't. So tell them, and maybe they'll subscribe today.
Yeah, well, thank you, Hugh, and I agree with you that they should all be subscribed. But what we wrote this morning is Chuck Schumer has asked the parliamentarian, the kind of the referee in the Senate, whether he could use the budget that he has already used for another bite at the apple to try to pass another bill under the fast track reconciliation rules. So this sounds really complicated, and it is, but he basically wants another chance to pass a big bill through just the majority threshold, not the 60 vote threshold, which is typical for bills in the Senate these days. So a relatively big move. And once we had heard about this yesterday, we actually had no idea that this was even possible, and it's not clear it is possible. The rule he's referring to is to try to get another bite at the apple here is relatively obscure. So we'll have to see if the parliamentarian buys this or not.
And that won't be the last step. And this audience is pretty sophisticated, Jake, so we can go into the tall grass because I talk about this a lot. Reconciliation is a once-a-year process that allows taxes to be raised and spending to be raised, or taxes to be lowered and spending to be raised. Whatever they want. It's a tax and spend under the Budget Act. The Budget Act is a piece of law, and therefore any interpretation that the parliamentarian renders that is contrary to past practice would be subject to review by the district courts. But the parliamentarian has to decide whether amending the Budget Act that just passed allows a second reconciliation bill. If it does, Jake, that means a third amendment would allow a third budget reconciliation. A fourth would allow a fourth.
Right.
In other words, it destroys, I think it's illegal, but that Chuck Schumer is asking for it, that's a hell of a scoop. Who is the aide that is framing that? Who came up with that idea?
Well, I think it's his legislative people. It's his his legislative team. And I think, to be honest with you, it's a long shot. I think we could say that definitively, that it's a long shot. And I think that the parliamentarian has obviously turned her back on Democrats already this year when they ruled that the $15 minimum wage was not proper in a reconciliation bill. And I imagine this will be another thorny situation. And a lot of people see this, Hugh, as just another attempt another precursor to blowing up the filibuster. So, I think you have to view kind of everything in that frame, that's the pressure that Schumer's under.
They don't have the votes to blow up the filibuster because Joe Manchin isn't going to be a liar. And he'll be a liar forever if they do. And he said it takes 67 votes to change the filibuster, meaning that he's going to stick with the Senate rules. And Kristen Sinema's not going to do it either, and I don't think Angus King is. I'm not worried about the filibuster, but I do think the parliamentarian should apply the precedents of the Senate. But even if it's a she, I believe, even if she doesn't, that ruling would be subject to challenge in the district court because it's the Budget Reconciliation Act that birthed this process. Jake, have you asked any lawyers about it yet?
Not yet. This was kind of a late-breaking thing, so we'll be digging into it more in the days ahead here. But yeah, this is going to be very thorny for them, and there's all sorts of fallout and potential review here, and I think the Schumer team recognizes that. And yes, the parliamentarian is a woman, and by the way, we've seen in the past when the parliamentarian is out of step with the majority, let's say, the parliamentarian could be removed. And I'm not suggesting that's going to happen here, but there is precedent for that.
Well, look, they're going to try and throw out an Iowa congresswoman. I also like the story I read earlier today that the National Republican Congressional Committee is already up running ads against an Iowa congresswoman who's going to vote to strip the seat from the Republican who actually won the election. Does Nancy Pelosi understand how that plays given January 6th and the general revulsion at trickery?
I actually take the minority view here, which is Pelosi probably doesn't even want to be involved in this whole thing. Listen, under the law, this congresswoman, this Democrat from Iowa who lost the election, Rita Hart, she lost by 6 votes. She appealed to the House Administration Committee, which is her right under the law. And the House Administration Committee has to play along with this. I think Democrats don't want to be anywhere near this. I think Pelosi recognizes that this is a losing issue, to be honest with you, and I think a lot of people wish that Rita Hart would just go away.
Now, Jake, I want to bring up a Washington Post column that I wrote this morning over at WashingtonPost.com. I did the math and I looked at the history. The Republicans have a lock on winning the House back in 2022, in my humble opinion, because Barack Obama lost 61 votes and 61 seats in his 63 seats in his first off-year election. Trump lost 40 plus, so Biden is already on the downhill. Plus, it's redistricting, and the Brennan Center shows that the Republicans control 181 congressional districts, Democrats only 74. So the deck is stacked for Kevin McCarthy to become the Speaker. Does that mean Nancy Pelosi is going to call it quits after this term, in your view? She doesn't want to go back to the minority again.
Well, I think she's going to call it quits. Yes, I think she's going to call it quits no matter what. And she has said that. She said that this will be her last term as Speaker. Listen, we've been guessing about Nancy Pelosi's future for a long time, and we've been consistently wrong. I mean, it's amazing that she survived after the 2010 elections that you just brought up, in which she lost 63 seats and lost control of the House of Representatives. So, I've lost a lot of proverbial money, not actual money, betting against Nancy Pelosi. But I do think that she's going to leave after this term.
Now, I also say in this column that Missouri, Ohio, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin are at risk for Republicans. I don't think Alaska is. I think Lisa Murkowski wins. And that Arizona, Georgia, New Hampshire, and maybe Nevada are at risk for Democrats in the Senate. Do you agree with my assessment?
Yeah, I do. Listen, the funny thing is that there could be a scenario in which Republicans take back the House and lose seats in the Senate. I mean, it's a tough map for Senate Republicans this time around. And listen, it's all about the candidates, right? If you get Sununu, the governor of New Hampshire, into that race for the Senate, he said he does not want to run. But Mitch McConnell has his way of being persuasive here. Then that's a big opportunity for Republicans in New Hampshire. Listen, it's really all about the candidates. Who wins the nomination in Ohio and who? So I just think there's a lot of variables at this point. But I completely agree with your assessment on those races.
Yeah, they need Doug Ducey to run in Arizona. They got to find a great candidate in Georgia. Republicans do, and then they have to find the three Republicans. All of them are good in Ohio, but I think J.D. Vance has the lead with Peter Thiel's $10 million in the bank. Let me close by asking you about Kevin Blackistone. Has an article in the Washington Post urging Major League Baseball to take the All-Star game away from Atlanta and the NC2As to move the Final Four out, et cetera, et cetera. I believe Major League Baseball will be catastrophically injured if they get involved in the voting security debates. I know the hard left wants to say what Georgia did is racist. Most of the country disagrees, according to Rasmussen. What's your reporting, Jake? Is Major League Baseball going to step into that swamp? They really can't afford to politicize the game at this point.
I have no idea what they are going to do, but as you know, and as you noted, I think professional sports leagues are increasingly pressured to do so, and I think it's going to be, I think it's difficult for them to stay away from these debates. What the fallout is, I don't know the answer to that, but I think that there's a lot of pressure for them to get involved.
Are athletes with brands like LeBron James, are they checking their supply lines to see whether they go back to China where the slave labor is now making goods? I mean, because if we're going to politicize sports, everything's going to be politicized. And the worst thing in the world right now is the genocide of the Uyghur people and the slave labor in China. And a lot of these athletes who make a lot of money out of American sports are getting their goods made in slave labor camps. Are we going to start following that up, Jake Sherman?
It's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know whether how cognizant people are of where that kind of stuff is made.
Last question. The Defense Committee, Armed Services in the House. There are some Democrat hawks on China, are there not, Jake Sherman?
There are, yeah. And listen, Chuck Schumer has long been a hawk on China, and is coming out with a piece of legislation with Senator Todd Young of Indiana, Republican Senator Todd Young of Indiana, trying to reorient the American government and the American research infrastructure to combat China. So there are there are people in the House and Senate who are China hawks, Democrats.
But will they spend money on defense? If Chuck Schumer actually added $100 billion for defense, he'd get Republican votes for his budget. Why doesn't he try? Oh, we're out of time. Jake Sherman, everybody go to Punchbowl.